So we're here talking All-Star games. We just had one of the biggest weekends, I would say, in sport. President's Day weekend was NHL Four Nations, NBA All-Star weekend, big weekend in sports. And we're just now starting to get out of that and get back to the regular season games that'll be kicking off. But the question is, why? Why All-Star games? Right? What are these All-Star games? What's the history behind it? And I have a couple things just to kind of compare and see, is there a format that works best for each league? Why do the leagues do it this way? And what was so bad about this NBA All-Star weekend that had ESPN, The Athletic, Fox News, all of these news outlets talking about how poor it was received and what these viewer numbers are looking like. So to kind of get back in the history of it, most of these All-Star games, they're fan voted or media voted, coaches vote, players vote. They're looking for the most part, this best v best or best on best style where it's the best players from the league or who are having a great season are recognized for the stats they're putting up, for how good their team's doing, and kind of get to be part of the showcase game. For some leagues, that showcase can be incentivized with a check. Right, it's bonus money. Some of them it's just extra sponsorship opportunities. And for some of these guys who have been doing it long enough, it's just an opportunity to get to hang out with maybe members of the league that you don't normally get to see all in one spot. So for all of these major leagues, except for the NFL, these All-Star games or weekends kind of take place mid-season. NBA is just about halfway. NHL, again, just about halfway. MLB does their Midsummer Classic in July, and NFL is the only one. They wait until after the season is finished, and you're looking at a week or two before the Super Bowl now when they do the Pro Bowl. But for the players that don't make the All-Star game or the Pro Bowl, or it's an opportunity to just rest, spend time with family. It's not really something that they're required to do, but for these other guys, it's work. So guys that are hurt, obviously they opt out, could go back to rehab. But for everybody else who makes this All-Star game, it's just another week of work. So kind of get into some of the backstory. So the NHL, the Four Nations Face-Off, as it's called, it was restructuring of the All-Star game. It is supposed to kind of hype up the NHL. It is NHL players are returning to the Olympics in 2026. The reason that they haven't been for the last two iterations of the Winter Olympics is because the NHL season has to halt, essentially, for these players to go to the Olympics. So the last two Olympics, they haven't had it. 2014 was the last one that NHL players were really encouraged or allowed to play. So the NHL decided, hey, let's try to get this hype back up, this energy back up. We want to encourage these people to have eyeballs on the Winter Olympics and to watch men's ice hockey. So the history for the NHL kind of All-Star game, it's changed formats a bunch, I think more than any other major league. Used to go from an East versus West. Now a couple years they had USA versus the world. Then they went to interdivision. So the best players in your division were represented. So you had a divisional team that would compete against these other divisions. Then they went to almost like a fantasy draft, schoolyard draft with captains that got to pick. And now this year they have the Four Nations Face-Off. They have already said they are moving back to the traditional All-Star game next year. But I do think that after they take a look at some of these numbers, they may have to reconsider. So this year the Four Nations were Sweden, Finland, Canada, and the United States, with the final taking place this Thursday between Canada and the United States. But just looking at some of these viewership numbers, the U.S.-Canada group match, so not the final, the group match that they played, drew over 4.4 million American viewers, and then something like 5 or 6 million from Canada. So I think they were just shy of 10 million total. But you look at just some of the Stanley Cup averages or All-Star games previous, right? The All-Star game last year only drew 1.3 million, and the Stanley Cup, so the championship series, averaged 4.2 million in 2024 per game. So just a group game, but just between the U.S. and Canada, you're already looking at bringing more eyes to the game. Specifically in that game, first, 9 or 10 seconds, we already had 3 fights. It means a little more to these guys because they're representing not just their team, but their country. So I do think that with a little bit more pride on the line, especially hockey, that kind of feeds into that. It was, I would say, a major success. With them wanting to talk about moving back to a traditional all-star game next year, I do think that there's going to be more and more people that are pushing for this country versus country or USA versus the world, to kind of have that patriotism, to kind of have a little bit more of that rivalry kind of built in. But we'll have to see. I am curious to see what those numbers are going to be for the final for US-Canada. I do imagine it's going to probably shatter what the group game was, but also that group game was on a Saturday night, so you're looking at Saturday night versus a Thursday. But we'll have to see. But then again, if you compare that to the other All-Star game that was taking place, so the NBA All-Star weekend was going on, that the history kind of goes back a little bit further. NBA All-Star game started in 1950s. It was supposed to bring that excitement back to basketball after the point shaving scandal that we won't talk about. But it was traditionally East versus West. So best players in the Eastern Conference, best players in the Western Conference. I mean, for decades. And then after they realized that viewership was going down, excitement was going down, they changed it to that fantasy kind of pickup schoolyard draft style we talked about that hockey did. And that worked for a couple years. They changed it to the draft happening live. So LeBron on one team or Giannis on one team or Steph Curry and actually like picking like it was a schoolyard pickup game who they wanted on their team. Now, similar to hockey, I mean, you get voted in, fan votes, media votes, coaches, other players, and it's an honor to be selected. I mean, you see these guys, Kobe, LeBron, Curry, where it's, 19-time All-Star, 10-time All-Star. That is something that does carry a little bit of pride with it, but that wasn't being conveyed to the viewers. So they changed that format to this year was something totally new. It was 4-team mini tournament. I think it was first team to 40 points wins. And they did a mini tournament on, I think it was Friday or Saturday, that had the rising stars and rookies and G League guys. And the winner of that tournament got to compete in this 4-team mini tournament against the quote-unquote traditional All-Stars. Now, each of the TNT commentary crew, so Shaq, Chuck, Ernie, they got to draft these teams. They still had to select the guys that were, again, traditionally voted in, but those were the players they were able to choose from between starters or reserves. And I would say it spiced it up a little bit, but it didn't bring that excitement that, again, you look across the hall to what NHL was doing that they had over the same weekend. Again, for numbers-wise, 2024, you're looking at the All-Star Game brought 5.5 million viewers, but compare that to the finals that had over 11 million average per game. So while hockey is consistently outdoing some of those Stanley Cup numbers, NBA is under half of what they were getting for the finals. But let's compare it to some of the other ones, right? So let's talk about baseball. Baseball, their first All-Star game, again, Midsummer Classic as it's termed, 1933, was part of the Chicago World Fair. And traditionally, they were playing this game to put money back into the players' pensions. So after a great first year, they ended up making an annual event, and it has stayed the American League versus the National League. It was a sense of pride to, again, represent your league against the other league. It was, back before the schedule changed, it was fairly rare for an American League team to play National League teams. You'd have maybe a couple rivalry games, but you weren't playing every team in the league. And the winner of that game used to be able to decide who was going to be the host or have more home games for the World Series. So again, there was a little bit more on the line there. As far as what those numbers look like, you're looking at the 2024 MLB All-Star Game, almost 7.5 million people, but the World Series was well over 15. So again, about half, a little bit under half of what the World Series was pulling. But I would say the MLB's probably stayed the most steadfast with, they know what their product is, they know who their viewers are, they don't really want to change. As far as like what baseball's been doing the last couple of years, you're looking at the pitch clock difference, making the bases a little bit bigger. They are trying to, I'm going to say, quote unquote, modernize the game, making it a little bit more palatable for younger viewers, people who are just trying to get into baseball. But they do want to try to stay traditional, right? Stay with their values of what they think the game brings, America's pastime, right? But then let's talk about the NFL. So the NFL has the Pro Bowl, but the Pro Bowl doesn't happen until the season is finished. So now you're looking at guys who have played 17, 18 games, even guys who were knocked out early in the playoffs, potentially 19 games, who are banged up, beat up, guys who have gone through months of preseason and workouts into regular season games, and now they're getting voted into this all-star game, we'll call it, but it never brought that intensity that some of these other games bring, especially being end of the season. Guys don't want to get hurt. Guys are looking for a vacation. I think what makes the NFL a little bit different with the Pro Bowl is that right now it's being held in Orlando, but for years it was held in Hawaii. I mean, it really was a vacation for these guys. It's, I got voted into the Pro Bowl. I'm taking this week. I'm bringing my family. Like, we're just going to go and have a good time. But then, of course, you still have to suit up and play a super physical game, so it wasn't really taken too seriously by some of these players. So now the NFL did try to change things up to, like we talked about with the NBA, spice it up a little bit. From 2014 to 2016, they moved to that schoolyard draft style we talked about with like Hall of Famers, Jerry Rice, being captains and getting to pick these players. But the last 2 years, they've actually changed it to a flag football game. I think that it's better for the quote-unquote intensity of the game, but a lot of these players, it doesn't translate. Maybe for some of them, right, like the Lamar Jackson, the Tyreek Hill, who are probably going to be good to very good flag football players, speed, agility, that sort of stuff. But some of these guys, the game doesn't translate very well. So I do think the NFL is probably still looking for what their solution's going to be over the next couple of years. I do think personally that they've probably done the most over what their weekend looks like, multi-day event, right? So their skills challenge, stuff that they're doing, dodgeball tournament, stuff that's still able to draw viewers, even if it's not the traditional all-star game. So I think theirs turns into more of a spectacle, similar to how like the NBA does theirs with the three-point contest, dunk contest, skills challenge, stuff like that. For the numbers for the NFL, you're looking at, I mean, this is probably the biggest discrepancy. 5.8 for the Pro Bowl last year, 5.8 million. And then for the Super Bowl, one of the biggest events worldwide, 123 million viewers last year. So they're not even getting a fraction of those people who are watching the Super Bowl. And they're only 2 weeks apart. I think what makes the NFL so interesting is they're choosing a weekend that there's nothing on. Just throw it on, get to watch your favorite players play these different sorts of games. But I think the viewers want to watch a real football game. What would it look like if they moved it to a mid-season break? They threw an extra game in there and incentivized it with game checks or incentivized it with bonuses for the winning team. I do think that the NFL probably has the most wiggle room to try to figure it out, but they are falling well short of the people who should be viewing the game. And then the last one, Major League Soccer. They've tried to stick with what they had. Their first one started as an East versus West with the two conferences. They've kind of settled into the MLS All-Stars versus a European club team. That worked quite well. I'm going to say some years. Started in 2005, and then they've kind of mixed in a couple of years that it was the MLS All-Stars versus the Liga MX, which is the Mexican league, their All-Stars. That worked kind of well too. It got canceled during COVID, but they did it last year. But you're looking at how can we make it so it's our league versus somebody else? Because then you have pride in not just who is representing from your own local team or from your state's team, but then we're looking at, okay, let's support our league and see who we can go compete against. And for a lot of these teams that they play against, since it is summertime, Juventus or Everton or whoever else comes over, it's preseason for them. So you're also getting to see these guys that would never compete against the MLS All-Stars. So it is kind of have that shiny new toy to it, where it's, that's so interesting. Oh, look, we're getting to see a different team. And if it's hosted at where you want to play, then maybe you're getting to see a team that you wouldn't have normally gotten to see from Europe. Since Apple bought the rights for the MLS for the broadcasting in 2023, numbers aren't totally readily available. They're not going to release all of that, especially with subscriptions. But We can go back to the 2022 numbers, and they only had close to 400,000 viewers for their All-Star game. I mean, again, well below any of these other leagues. They did pull $2.15 million for the MLS Cup final that year, but they are also trying to mix it up with Skills Challenge, or like I said, doing it the MLS All-Stars versus the Liga MX All-Stars. So they haven't found what sticks yet. The one thing that I do find that's so interesting from the MLS is that if a player is voted in but elects not to participate, they're suspended for a league game after the All-Star break. So that's not like, hey, I'm injured and I can't play. That's, hey, I was elected to play, but I'm going to spend this time doing something else, right? Could be whatever. Then you're essentially punished from the league. Now, does it directly correlate to what's going on? I do think that the story, that came out with LeBron James, he was voted into the All-Star game. He did not back out of the All-Star game until several hours before on Sunday. So for him, it's like, hey, he got in. If he knew he was carrying an injury with, it could be whatever, he's close to 40, if not 40 plus right now. You're looking at any little niggle could bother him, but you knew you were voted into this game. So he took up a spot of somebody who could have put on a showcase and represented and potentially had their career elevated, but instead he elected to take the spot and then sit out anyways. Now, again, for me, I love that MLS approach. Suspend him for a game. Like, make that be an incentive. You were voted by media, players, coaches, fans. They want to see you in this game. Right? He has a big enough brand that it's not going to hurt him to sit out, but if you see some of the discourse online, people are upset. We don't know who that next player in line would have been. Whose career could have been bolstered just by making an appearance or going out and having a great 20, 30 minutes, whatever it would have been for that team, but we'll never know. I do think that if other leagues took that approach like the MLS did, hey, it's for the betterment of the league. Help the league out, or say you're injured, move aside, let the next guy fill in. Like, that's totally okay. But you have to do something. You can't just call out that late. And you could get into an even deeper conversation of that the NBA has this problem of load management, and I want to go watch this player play. They're in my town, and I go and buy a ticket, and all of a sudden they're sitting out. Right? Joel Embiid doesn't play back-to-backs. But what if that's the one that I bring my family to, and we're going to go watch this game because my kid is a huge fan of Joel Embiid, and instead he's sitting in his street clothes on the sideline. Now, again, injuries happen. I get that. It's part of the game. It's part of sports. But I do think when you're talking fans and people's money, it gets a little murky sometimes. So I think that the NBA is going to have to figure out what that problem is. But that's a conversation for another time. But, I think what this All-Star game kind of represents, this conundrum that we're talking about, is leagues want to do something to put their best players on a pedestal. So it says, hey, here's the face of our league. Here is an Anthony Edwards. Here's a Victor Wembanyama. And we want you to tune into what we're doing because of these guys. And when it works out really well and, you're putting up great stat lines in an All-Star game and it's the only thing that's on TV on that Saturday night, that's amazing. But on the flip side, when you're trying to watch, and the format's changing every year, right? I mean, you go back to last year, the score, there were almost 400 points put up in the All-Star game, in the NBA All-Star game last year. Which, if you're a fan of scoring, that's fantastic. But if you're a fan of the game, I say game in quotations, but a fan of the game that's defense and passing and fundamentals, you're not going to get that in an All-Star game. Right, you got guys that are coming off the bench scoring 40, 50 points just because nobody's out there to defend. They're not out there to try as hard as they would in a regular season game. They're out there to have fun. But I think the league does have to find what that balance is going to be between, hey, we want our guys to come, represent, have a good time, make it an enjoyable experience or enjoyable weekend, but also we have to put something on TV that people are going to want to tune into. Now for this, I'll go back to the Four Nations thing just because that's kind of in the news right now. There has been so much hype around this U.S.-Canada rivalry that there are guys that are chirping from both teams, right? Before games even played, they're talking about, hey, stuff on social media, stuff online, stuff in the news, that I think there is more bad blood in this game. And it might turn into another couple of fights just in the first minute or 30 seconds of that first period, but it's going to have so many viewers of people who aren't even necessarily hockey fans because it has hit the mainstream now. So again, you're picking a Thursday night for this final. There's not going to be much else on TV. You're looking at, hey, if I want to put sports on, I might throw this on. I might not even be a fan of hockey or a fan of these two countries, but I think it's going to be something that's interesting. When you look at, right, football dominates because it's 4, maybe 5 days a week now that you can find a football game on TV. You don't even have to be a fan of one of those teams that are on. It's just football's on. It's football season. Let's just throw a game on. I think that hockey is hoping that they can kind of fill that gap, right? NBA, this is kind of that midseason lull. First teams are coming back Wednesday. Most of the teams are coming back Thursday night. If hockey's just going to be that one thing that's on that everyone's going to tune into, we might be looking at 10, 15 million viewers on this one game alone. I do think that Canada's going to really bolster that number up, but just 4.4 alone from the U.S.-Canada group game in the States, I think you're probably looking at 6, maybe 7 million for this final. So again, we'll see, but I think that we'll have to go back and see what these numbers are going to be. But I think that the leagues that have it figured out, baseball as an example, they know their formula, they're not going to mix with it. That's just what they're going to do. I think that almost everybody else is playing catch-up. NHL may have found what works for them now, but when you're looking at the Olympics picking back up next year, they may have to change it one more time. So we'll see, but that's it for me. See ya.